matter what you say, today could be the day. We've got plenty to learn and lots to see along the way. You know what time it is, no matter where you've been. So let's do it again. Listen up and let the sun shine in. We've got soul training. Time to practice what you preach. Ooh, yeah. Yes, we do. We've got soul training.
I know we really like our nicknames. You know, Dano, Big Show, and I don't even know what my nickname is.
Melatones Jones.
Melatones. We had that's reaching back. We hadn't used that one in a while. Got to bring it back.
I forgot about that, but I was just going to propose a nickname change.
Okay.
For Big Show.
I thought his was the most etched in stone.
Well, I like Broadway Joe. You like Broadway Joe?
I don't think that's going to stick. I didn't think Big Show was going to stick, but people have called me that. People that shouldn't have called me that.
But you know, the back of our church building is Broadway out here, so you'd be Broadway Joe.
Yeah.
Joe Namath.
I'm going to veto that. I'll stay Big Show, not Broadway.
I'll give you an extra hush puppy, Joe, if you'll tell me who Joe Namath, who was he playing for when he got that turn, that nickname, and won the Super Bowl?
The Jets.
The Jets. That's right. Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's a little before my time.
Okay. Where did he go to college? Another hush puppy.
Notre Dame?
Are you kidding me?
Where did he go?
Goodness.
Alabama.
Okay.
Nobody cares about Alabama.
Yeah, we do. Matter of fact, you're bringing this up. I'll drop this factoid that the first two Super Bowl winning quarterbacks were both Alabama quarterbacks, Bart Starr and Joe Namath.
Wow. Isn't that something?
Yeah. I'll put crickets in after that comment when I do the editing.
Well, my third extra hush puppy for you is, where was Joe Namath from? What state?
He doesn't sound like he's from the South.
No.
Keep in mind, this guy played like before I was born.
Late 60s.
Vermont.
No.
I don't know.
They don't even play football in Vermont, do they?
Well, I didn't figure he was born in a football stadium.
Pennsylvania.
Oh, well, I wasn't too far off.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Well, I mean, I don't know how many miles, but you were several miles off. But, yeah, I like Broadway Joe. I was just throwing it out there, see if you'd be interested in maybe thinking about it. We can vote on it later. I mean, there's three of us, so, I mean.
Well, I'm a no, Daniel.
Oh, we did sort of impose Big Show Joe on you. Like you reluctantly came on board.
Well,
with that one.
you are the tiebreaker then. Alan thinks Broadway. I'm saying no. I'm going to stick with Big Show.
But you could do like a viewer survey.
No.
Want to do that?
I could.
I still am partial Big Show. I feel like that's established.
Okay. Well, I'll work on you later. I'll send you an email later tonight with some things to think about. With that being said, we think about, of course, I mean, we all like, well, no, not everybody, but I think the three of us like sports and those things. And I once heard a gentleman that I'm hoping we'll get on the show one day, Willie Franklin. And Brother Willie, he said that the NFL is no place for a man of God. That's Willie Franklin's words, not mine. But there's a YouTube sermon of his you can watch, and it's really, really good. Willie I've never met him, but I feel like I know him. But my point is, he played in the NFL for a little while, and also he went to Bart Warren's favorite school, that little school out there in Oklahoma. That's where Willie went to school. But I've often thought about, making it in the NFL or any type of other big culture or organization, but yet quickly, very few people realize that it's not where they need to be. But because many times we fall prey to just going along to get along. So I would just want to know if we could just spend a few minutes thinking about the culture that we are in and the challenges that Christians face. I mean, how can we be in the culture but not be influenced by the culture, and stay strong and maintain our allegiance to Christ, and also be a light in a world of darkness?
And those are some always timely questions. I guess timeless questions would be a better way to say that, because that's what Christians are going to struggle with in so many ways. It's interesting that you bring up the subject of being light in the world. That's one of the the unusual characteristics of light is light is able to simultaneously expose corruption without itself being corrupted. You can shine light on the darkest, nastiest, dirtiest substance, and the light itself remains pure and clean. And that's sort of the challenge for the Christian in the world, is to be in the world, expose what needs to change in the world, but remain uncorrupted in the process. So you're talking about our influence. You're talking about influence that cuts both ways. What influences us versus how we influence our society as well.
Well, sometimes I feel like, well, even during Jesus' time, he was kind of counterculture to what was happening there. So it's always been that godly folks have been different. But sometimes it feels like now it's real easy for us to sit back and complain about how everything's going terribly, the world's sinful. The world's always been sinful, but it seems like maybe we allow them to be as sinful. We don't point it out. Like, I think that's a major difference between Christ and us, is that he pointed it out. The apostles pointed it out to the people doing these things. A lot of times we will gripe about it or put a Facebook meme or something like that, but we don't follow up with the education as to why it's wrong. Right. We just kind of complain about it.
Well, as we think about the things wrong with culture, there are a couple things that are helpful to keep in mind. One, as Paul Harvey used to say, is in times like these, it helps to remember that there have always been times like these. It actually isn't the worst it's ever been. You go and you do some research into Roman culture and Greek culture, the cultures that were around the Israelites and the Jews as they were existing in biblical times. Those cultures were terrible in terms of their morality. And so it is not worse now than it's ever been. Matter of fact, the churches and God's people have thrived in environments this bad and worse from a moral standpoint. But we ought to, I believe, the Bible teaches, hold ourselves and our brethren to a higher standard than we do those outside of the church. We ought to look at those outside the church with a lot more grace when it comes to moral issues than we do ourselves. And here's kind of where I get that. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, starting in verse 9 and following for a few verses, Paul writes, "I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with immoral people. I did not at all mean with the immoral people of this world, or with the covetous and swindlers or the idolaters, for then you would have to go out of the world. But I wrote you not to associate with any so-called brother, if he is an immoral or covetous or idolater or swindler or drunkard, not even to eat with such a one. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? And do you not judge those who are within the church? But those who are outside, God judges. Remove the wicked man from among yourselves." So I actually, if somebody is a Christian, I hold them to a higher standard. I'm harder on them in my assessments of what they're doing. And myself, I try to hold myself to the highest standard and not judge anybody more harshly than I don't judge myself. But we've got to be within Christianity, within the church, we've got to hold ourselves to a higher standard than those outside. But in doing that, we recognize that we can't expect those outside of Christ to hold Christian values the way that we do. And we're not judging them as a result of that. They're outside of Christ. They've got plenty of problems as is. So, you know, when the back, I don't know if this is a great way to say it or not, but when the heathen acts like a heathen, why would we be shocked by that? You know, that's what we should expect. And
I just think about several things as you were talking about that. What you said, Paul Harvey said, in times like these, there's always been times like these. And, you know, I think about early on, my mother-in-law we'd not been married very long, and it was. I'll just stop. I'll say this and kind of stop short of saying everything. We don't want our inbox to blow up just yet, but there was a big movement 20 plus years ago nationwide to redefine from a constitution standpoint what marriage was or what it should be, and they were redefining, let's say. And I can remember being, just really worked up one day, being in my in-laws' house. My mother-in-law reminded me, and she wasn't rebuking me or redirecting me. She just says, Alan, this is not a new idea. This has always been a challenge in the world. And so we had a little conversation, and she really shifted a lot of I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. I was ready to go conquer those who wanted to oppose that, which we should. I was where it bothered me. And, but yet my point is, this point she made to me is that, look, this is, let's try a different way. There's always been this problem. And, so let's, don't ruin your afternoon here, so, and I think about that. And then another place in Scripture, you talk about, you're more of a, obviously, I'll just speak for me, not for Joe, but a Bible historian, from an archaeological standpoint, and from, even during different cultures of the Roman cultures and how Christians were persecuted, and times have been, I think, a lot worse during that time. I mean, even in my lifetime in the United States of America, I really do not know what persecution is. I really don't. Some people may look at you funny in the public workplace, or that you may be restricted from saying certain things in the workplace, but we can come to our building here and we can go to the public square. So I don't know what it's like so I guess my mother-in-law helped me to stop panicking, because she directed me back to Scripture and says, look, this has always been, these days have always been these days. Right. So that helped me from a culture standpoint. And the other thing that you brought out with what Paul was saying is that I kind of dovetail off that in Luke 15:1-2, that as Jesus begins to teach those three beautiful parables, and my favorite is the prodigal son, but just those two verses. Then all the tax collectors and sinners drew near to hear him, and the Pharisees and scribes complained, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. Now we know that Jesus was not fellowshipping and socializing, but these folks were not church folk. They were not, they were the audience that were considered to be in the dark. So Jesus made a point to reach out to them, but he was not going to be influenced by them. So for me, that's a great message. I used to get worked up when my kids were smaller about, obviously be mindful of who their friends are, but in the workplace or in the school place, should we allow our kids to be part of things? Sure. But then you start to realize that it's up to me or my wife and I to make sure that we are strengthening them so that they are the influencer and not the influencee.
Well, I think that did I cut you off, Daniel? I hope I don't cut this episode in half and cut it short, but I think the solution to a lot of this, and I'll explain to the listener, we're recording this one day after a mass shooting at an elementary school where several precious young children and their teachers lost their lives. Alan, earlier tonight you were talking about, to me, the solution is love, and that's why these people were drawn to Jesus and why he was drawn to them. He loved them. He wanted to show them what was right because he loved them. Sometimes it's really easy for us to talk about love and talk a good game with it, but do we show that love? If someone is
even
different,
even if they don't want to be loved,
even if they don't want to be, if someone is saying, different things about you, or they approve of things that we don't approve in, their lifestyle is different than how we think and how the Bible says their lifestyle should be. Well, should we just turn our back on those people and say, crazies? Or should we continue to be there for them and continue to love them? And I think that young man that carried out this heinous crime had no love in his heart. Right. But I think as Christians, if we focus on that, you brought up 1 John 4, verse 7, It says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God." So as Christians, man, we should really be focusing on that. We really need to up our love game, I feel like. And if the brotherhood as a whole focused on this love, that would be the best thing that we could do to help steer our culture.
Our culture has even twisted the virtue of love and has tried to make it, they've tried to redefine it and make it something that's different from what it really is.
Yeah, well, we've mentioned before, love does not mean approval.
Right. But in our culture today, many people can't see that. And so, looking at the example of Jesus, he socially accepted sinners of every variety. There's nobody that he's the Son of God, and there's nobody that he felt like he was too good to sit down and share a meal with. That didn't mean that he wasn't going to offer some correction to them.
Or that he participated in their sinfulness.
That's right.
He wasn't permitting, therefore he wasn't promoting.
Sure. But that quote's made it onto the podcast at least 3 times now.
Yeah, I get a lot of mileage out of a lot of stuff.
You like that one. But the thing is, with this, is that I've lost my train of thought now.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I permitted my train of thought to go off.
Jesus
track.
was with these folks. He wasn't participating in their sinfulness.
Right. He wasn't participating. He wasn't approving of it. He loved them. He approved of them, but not all of their choices. Same thing as parents. Any halfway decent parent is going to love their kid, but their kid is going to do some things that need correction. And because you love the child, you're going to say, that's not a good path for you.
I wrote something down here when you said love, what the world says. I think the world says love means if you love me, you're going to let me do what I want to do. Yeah. That's what love is. And I don't know. I'm hoping my family listens to Soul Training. I send it out to them every time we get one. But our son, my wife told me he was wanting to. I'll just tell you, I'm hoping he'll.
It's just us.
Okay, it's just us. All right,
nobody else is listening.
Daniel says our work is evergreen, so I'm hoping Asa will hear this. In the next, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But he graduated from our little high school Friday night, and there was you guessed it, a party. It was going to be not school sponsored, by the way. It was going to be in a field somewhere, and lots of
a good party, right?
Yeah, those kind of parties, I guess.
To some.
And he had lobbied me and his mother, but he wanted to go just show up and see some of his friends for the last time. And we both drew a line in the sand and said, no. Not going to do it. We love you, but we're not going to, let you go. Mm-hmm. And as the next day or so went on, I learned later that he told his mom, my wife, he said, "Thank you for not letting me do what I want to do." And so to me, I feel like that's love.
Yeah, it is.
People, and that's one thing that's been lost, but a lot of times we need to do a podcast on this too, by the way. Mm-hmm. Boundaries are a good thing, and kids especially. You would think they wouldn't want boundaries, but they do. They respect those. They respect the boundaries a lot of times, and they appreciate having them.
They realize sin will take you farther than any of us want to go.
Yeah. Well, as we think about some of these moral issues too, I think it's important that we recognize that there can be a danger in preaching morality without preaching Christ. Because I think there's a lot of well-meaning Christians that they want to preach the morality, which is valid and needs to be taught and needs to be spread. But the moral system falls apart if it's not based on Christ. And if we flip that around, if we're preaching Christ, then Christian morality will come along behind it. But there's a whole brands of Christianity out there that where you find people taking great pride and comfort in their own righteousness, their own morality. I'm a good person.
Yeah, there was a group, I haven't heard much from and I'll name them, the Westboro Baptist Church. You hadn't heard much about those people. I know, Alan. I don't think they're going to come after us. Or they might be protesting out here one day.
Send you an email.
But they will. They were protesting at funerals of servicemen and things like that. That's not the love that what I read about earlier.
But our faith cannot be compartmentalized. It's got to, this whole idea of you can believe what you want to believe as long as you keep it in your private life, in your home. It can't affect you in the public square. It's something that's spread by a lot of people today. But that's not it's not feasible and it's not consistent. If you have a sincerely held religious belief, how can it not impact every aspect of your life? The only way to say, well, you've got to compartmentalize that, it can't impact you, is for me to completely devalue your belief and say, I know what you're believing is not true anyway, so let's just keep it in the corner.
And I was thinking too about being compartmentalized, and of course we've had, and that's a whole nother podcast. I would love for us to talk about Christian education, homeschool education, public school education, Christian education. I would love to talk about those things because I think they're important to talk about, and everybody's kind of on their own path. But there again, both our children actually have been kind of mocked by kind of I don't know how to say it, kind of a left-handed mock kind of from one teacher in particular. My kids are out of high school now, so they're not going to be penalized. I hope not. But my son will say something about he was really worried about this test or something coming up, and his teacher would in a mocking kind of way because she knew where he stood, and he was has always been very vocal about his religion and politics of our two kids, and she said, "Well, just pray about it." And kind of in a sarcastic kind of way. Yeah. So for me, I feel like our kids, our children who are Christians, mm-hmm. I feel like that they do encounter probably more than we do, because teachers are, the Greek term is locoparentis. They are in place of parents. Did I impress you with that? Yeah. They are in place of parents. So they can kind of say a few things like that to kids, whereas that staff member probably wouldn't say that.
And you should explain you are a teacher. You can speak about this.
Sure. Yeah. But I wouldn't do that. But I just think about in the public sector that our kids as Christians, they're going to struggle with culture when they, at any level, elementary school, middle school, or high school, they're going to struggle with that. So we have to hopefully equip our kids to be prepared. Hey, get ready. You're going to take a few shots along the way.
Be ready to make a defense. Right?
Yeah, be ready to make a defense. And I may have shared this on another podcast, but that's something I've told a lot of our parents here in our congregation and our kids. You have the power. You have more parents and students have more power than teachers. Than I would have in our faculty. If, and my son, he would bark back or give a defense of, not bark back, but give a defense of where he stood. So he welcomed it. He welcomed those conversations. So parents and kids, you use your voice in the culture.
As we think about living within a culture that's very different from our religious culture, the Old Testament books of exile, like Daniel, are great areas to study for that, because here you have this time period where the Israelites, the Jews, they're in captivity. They're living as a part of another nation, first Babylon, then Persia, and they're still having to hang on to a separateness while also being part of something else. And so you have Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're all engaged.
Not living in a vacuum.
They're not living in a vacuum. They're engaged in government positions, actively working for the betterment of their host country, while also maintaining some religious separateness and doing the things that they need to do to not violate their conscience and their religious law. And sometimes there's points of conflict. Sometimes there's areas where I don't know if you'd call it compromise, but there's places where they choose their battle, like, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's their Babylonian names. That's not their Hebrew names. But as far as we know, even though those are Babylonian names and pagan names with pagan meanings, as far as we know, they didn't refuse to acknowledge them because those are the names most commonly used in description of them in the book of Daniel. So it would be logical to assume that that's a name commonly used by them. So they're not fighting everything. They're not dying on every hill, but they have lines they won't cross. And they are refusing to do things that are blatantly wrong and contrary to the will of God. And that's a model for us, I think. We can be engaged in culture. We can be active in our society, but we still can't compromise those things that are essential elements of our faith. And as you brought up the topic, Alan, I think one of the things that you had in mind was our ways we engage culture through our entertainment selections.
Or social media.
Or social media, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's something that every Christian needs to take seriously as to what their choices are going to be, how that whole garbage in, garbage out idea, what we're allowing into our minds and what we're allowing into the minds of our children, and how that's going to impact them.
And what people are watching. Our brother and friend Steve Higginbotham, of course it's his article, and I always give him credit for it, which I should. But several years ago, when Facebook kind of started to take off, I really like something that he had written. It's called Facebook Etiquette for Christians, and so every now and then, when I see some of our brothers or sisters and sisters and going back and forth, I will not tag them, but I will go to Steve's website. I
Share
will.
that one again.
I will. I'll get multiple shares out of that. And here's a little Facebook tip for him to give everybody. If you want something to be seen, here's the trick. Set your alarm for about 4 or 4:30 in the morning, and you post whatever you want to post and hit a run all day long, and people will see that. There's no charge for that. But I will see people who kind of go, we're about to see it right now. Joe mentioned that we're a day out of this school shooting. Yeah. And I've already, yesterday afternoon, I'd already seen Christians, going back and forth and, with people who are Christians, some who are not, on the gun laws. Now, that's a whole nother mini movie that we could do. But the point is that the other side of that is we're to be in the world, not of the world, but we have to be careful not to be influenced by the world, because if we're not careful, like you mentioned in the beginning, holding each other to a higher standard, if you got on some people's Facebook page, you couldn't tell if they were a Christian or not if you didn't read their bio.
Right.
Well, sometimes it's real easy while we're on a social media kick. It's real easy for folks to condemn sharing some debauchery out there. But if you look at their feed, everything is so divisive politically, or to me, I try not to put it in now. I'm far from a perfect fella, but I've tried consciously not to post that much. And when I do, I try to post things that are not divisive one way or the other. Because if I'm posting divisive things, whatever I happen to post about Christ, the people I've offended, automatically half of the population.
You lost 50%.
I've lost 50% of them. And so I feel like that's something we really need to, and that's probably, I haven't read Steve's thing in a while. You haven't tagged me, so I haven't seen it.
I'll get up at 4 a.m, and I'm going to share this, and I will tag you.
Okay. Don't tag me. But yeah, let's try not to post things that are divisive, even if it's true, or that most of your bubble, the people in your bubble would agree with. Anything divisive, I would not want to put that unless it's something biblical
or controversial. Right. I mean, from a celebrity or entertainment or something like that, because I've learned this phrase a lot, and this is not scripture, but perception is reality.
Yeah.
If people will look at that and go, wow, I didn't realize they were into that. They really supported that. I thought they were Christians. They must be cool with it.
Yeah. Well, if your highest goal is to exalt Christ and to spread Christianity, then that's going to tint everything else that you share and you put out there. And you got to think, how is this going to impact my influence for Christ? Is it going to help it or is it going to hurt it? Is it going to be neutral? Some things are neutral, and that's okay. But that needs to be in our minds. And as we think about the importance of being selective in what we view, I think we can be, there are broad principles that we lay out there that are helpful in trying to decide what we're going to take into our our eyes and our ears, what we're going to consume. But it's also hard to be dogmatic in applying the application of those principles to everybody else, because almost nobody is completely consistent in their application of those things. I see a lot of people that'll condemn this show or this whatever, but then you find out they really are big fans of this other show that if you were going to nitpick, you're like, well, that's got
It's
some
not
stuff.
squeaky clean either.
It's not squeaky clean either. That's right. But here's the principle. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, it says, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things." So there he tells us what to dwell on, what types of things to fill our minds with. Now here's how I like to illustrate that. So what I want you to do is, whatever you do, Joe, Alan, dear listener, right now, do not think about a majestic bald eagle flying high in the sky. Do not imagine his wings spread out so wide. Do not imagine the fierce look in his eyes. Do not imagine the brilliant azure blue backdrop to him. Do not imagine him swooping down with talons extended and snatching a fish out of a pond. Do not imagine any of that. All right? Did you follow my instructions? Did you imagine an eagle, or did you not imagine an eagle?
I did the exact opposite of what you're telling us.
You saw the eagle in your head, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah. It's so much harder to not think about something than it is to think about something. All right, so let's flip it around. So this time,
Will you give me another chance?
yeah, I'll give you here. I'm going to do the I'm going to do the opposite. This time, imagine a sunny field of rolling green grasses, and there's a golden brown stallion standing in the shade of a tree in that field, munching on the grass. All right? Did you have any trouble imagining the horse? No, because I told you what to think, not what not to think. All right, so that's what Philippians 4:8 does for us. It tells us what to think instead of telling us all the stuff not to think about. So if we keep that in mind with our entertainment selections and whatever else we're filling our mind with, it's so much easier to saturate ourselves with what we should think about, those things that are good and noble and pure and excellent and praiseworthy and all those sorts of things, than it is to try to say, all right, don't think about that, don't think about that, don't think about that. Does that make sense?
It does. And as I listen to you talk, I think about, and give Dr. Ritchie another shout out. He talked about I can't use the term that he used. I have to go back and listen to it, but he talked about basically conditioning. Mm-hmm. How you wire your brain, or how you can rewire your brain. And so I think that's all connected to what you were saying. So that's an excellent point from a Christian standpoint, from a culture standpoint. And I just wanted to have one final point, or make one final point, that is, if from a celebrity standpoint, from a school standpoint, a work standpoint, all those things, as we are connected to culture, may we remember that we're committed to Christ. Mm-hmm. And for me, that kind of closes the loop for me with Philippians 4:8.
Sure.
That, we're going to have to connect to culture, but let's be committed to Christ.
Well, I'm getting the wrap-up signal here from Big Show, Broadway Joe, whatever it is we're calling him now.
Can we just stick with Big Show?
Can I call him Bear Bryant?
Speaking of Broadway Joe, Bear Bryant said that Broadway Joe was the best athlete that he ever coached.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
Did you hear him say it?
I did. We were
Had a little,
sitting around,
little
booster gathering, eating some golden flake potato chips, and
I bet, drinking Coke.
Drinking Coke. Yeah, no, that didn't happen at all. Just in case, I don't know how evergreen this is. Somebody may not realize the time just doesn't match up at all for me to have interacted socially with Bear Bryant. Anyway. So thank you, our dear listener, for letting us be a part of your day and what you have chosen to fill your mind with over the past few minutes. We hope that it's been beneficial to you and thoughtful. And we hope that you'll give us a 5-star rating and share it with somebody else. And we also want to thank the elders of the South Green Street Church of Christ for making soul training possible. And for everyone, until next time, keep soul training.
Soul training. Time to practice what you preach. Ooh, yeah. Yes, we do. We've got soul training.
To learn more, you can email us at soultrainingpodcast@gmail.com, or you can write to us, P.O. Box 503, Glasgow, Kentucky, 42142. That's Soul Training.